Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mr. Ibe Benjamin. I am a chartered accountant and a management consultant. I'm the CEO of Danny King Consulting. Danny King Consulting is a chartered accounting and a management consultant firm. We provide services which include preparation of accounting books for our clients, preparation of financial statements, internal control system management. We also provide tax consultancy services, financial advisory services. We also provide services in area of human resource management, recruitment, selection and placement, training and development, marketing research, strategic management. We also engage in internal control system preparation and implementation. We also engage in project management and other consultancy services. In our series of capacity building lecture programs, today we're going to look at risk management. Before we progress, we'd like to give our contact numbers and other information for those who would like to have access to any of these services that we provide. Our contact phone number is 234 080 281 77177. 234 080 281 77177. Also, we can be reached through this number 234 081 56 62 2679. 234 081 56 62 2679. Our WhatsApp number is 234 09 09 493 5985. 09 09 493 5985. Our website is www.dannykingconsulting.com. www.dannykingconsulting.com. Our email address is dannykingconsulting@gmail.com. dannykingconsulting@gmail.com. So, in continuation of our lecture series, today we shall be looking at risk management. We shall be looking at risk management. To this end, we shall look at introduction to risks, risk management process, business risks, then responses and mitigation to risks, or what referred to as risk control, and enterprise risk management. These are the topics we are hoping to cover in the course of our lecture today. So we start by looking at introduction to risk. Meaning of risk. What is risk? Risk can be defined as the combination of the probability of an event and its consequences. In most cases, the consequence of the risk occurring is that it usually bring a negative consequence. Risk can also be defined as the likelihood of occurrence of a negative consequence or outcome. In other words, risk can be defined as the possibility of unfortunate occurrence or the chance of a loss. So the possibility that an event goes wrong or happens in a negative way, that is what referred to as a risk. The possibility that an event will occur, and whenever such event occurs, it brings a negative consequence. We refer to such as a risk. In a simple language, we can simply say that risks are usually associated with the possibility that things might go wrong, that events might turn out worse than expected, or that something bad might happen. So, whenever we have an event occurring, and the consequence of such event occurring is that it brings a loss or negative consequence, we refer to such event as a risk. The International Standard Organization, ISO, in 2009 defined risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. The effect of uncertainties in objectives, that is the International Standard Organizations on 31,000 guidelines on risk management. This is how they define the risk. In a nutshell, there is no 100% assurance that a risk will happen. If it eventually becomes a reality, the unwanted consequences might occur. We cannot predict with certainty that a risky event will happen. But the unfortunate thing is that whenever such event happens, usually bring a negative consequence. The question may be asked, is death a risk? Is death a risk? It is very certain that every man will die. Since death is certain, does it mean it's not risky? Death is a risk because an element of uncertainty is traceable to death, which is the timing. We do not know when somebody will die. It's not predictable when somebody will die. It is that element of timing that we do not know, and that's what makes death risky. Now let's look at essential elements of risk or characteristics of risk. The following are the features of risk. We have uncertainty. For an event to be described as being risky, there must always be an element of uncertainty in relation to timing. So whenever you have an event occurring which you cannot predict the timing, the period that event will occur, then that means that event has some element of risk. The uncertainty element can alternatively be described as a likelihood or probability. Likelihood of the event occurring or the probability of an event occurring. It should be, however, noted that insofar as an element of uncertainty is traceable to an event, then such an event is justified as being a risk. So whenever you have an event that there is an element of uncertainty that can be traced to it, the implication is that that event has an element of risk. Another feature of risk is loss. The loss involved here is usually an economic or a financial loss. The element of loss here refers to the negative outcome such a risk will bring. Whenever a risky event occurs, it usually brings a negative consequence. It can lead to economic loss. It can bring about a problem, a jeopardy with no negative consequence. Now let's look at classification of risks. Classification of risks. Risk can be classified into the following. Number one, fundamental risks and pure risks. Fundamental risks and particular risks. Fundamental risks and particular risks. Fundamental risks are those risks that affect the society as a whole. The risks that occur which will affect everybody in the society, we refer to such risks as fundamental risks. Such risks that we refer to as being fundamental, they are impersonal in origin and consequence. The occurrence of such risk cannot be traced to an individual. It's a risk that occurs in the society as a whole. So, and because of that, it affects to everybody in that society. An individual has no control over such occurrence of such risk. The causes are beyond human control. They are not under the control of human beings. Extreme cases of such risks include fundamental risks. Examples of such risks that we refer to as fundamental risks include something like a civil war, civil unrest, earthquake, volcanic eruption. These are fundamental risks that are beyond the human control. They are not in origin. I mean, they are not personal in origin. They are not being originated by individual. And whenever they are occurring, they affect everybody in that particular society, not only an individual, but rather all the citizens, all the people who are living in that society. That is what referred to as a fundamental risk. We also have another type of risk we refer to as a particular risk. Particular risks are those risks that arise out of an individual's decision and actions. They are simply said to be personal in origin and consequence. Such risks emanate from the decision of individuals, and it affects the individual that makes such a decision. For instance, the decision to own and drive a car, decision to own a house, decision to go university, maybe on a part-time program, have some element of risk, and such risks affect those individuals that make such risks. They are not affecting everybody in the society. That is what referred to as a particular risk. Another classification of risk is what referred to as speculative risk and pure risk. Speculative risk and pure risk. Speculative risks are those risks which offer the possibility of either a gain or loss. Whenever it occurs, it can bring a positive consequence or a negative consequence. If a beneficial or adverse outcome stems from a specific event, then there is a speculative risk. The risk that event may bring a positive consequence or a negative consequence is what referred to as a speculative risk. Just like when you toss a coin. A coin, when tossed, can come up as head or tail. We cannot determine with certainty the occurrence of such event. So the possibility that an event can be positive or negative is an example of what we refer to as a speculative risk. Speculative is also called a two-way risk. It is called two-way risk because it has a positive, it may have two-way consequences, either positive or negative. It exists when the actual future event or outcome might either be better or worse off than expected. Speculative risks emanate from buying of stocks and shares in a stock exchange. It can also emanate from somebody selling products, both importation and exportation, and international trade. For those that are engaging in international trade, because of the exchange rate differences and variations, the exchange rate can increase or it can decrease. It can be a worse off or it can improve to people's advantage or to people's disadvantage. In that situation, we refer to such as a speculative risk. Also, share price in the stock exchange, the share price of company shares or the price of company shares can go up or it can go down. Whenever it goes up, some people can gain. When it goes down, some people may also lose. So, such share price increases is an example of a speculative risk. The next categories of risk we are looking at is a pure risk. Pure risks are those risks that only lead to a loss, damage, or hurt. If the possibility of a harm is the only alternative of a specific event, then it is a pure risk. When you have a risk that whenever it occurs, it usually brings negative consequences. We refer to such risk as a pure risk. Example is a shipwreck. Whenever there is a shipwreck, the consequences the losses are immeasurable. They are so so numerous. They are unquantifiable. The ship will be lost, lives will be lost, and depending on the product that are being carried, that can be incurring, the owners will incur so much losses. So such losses or such risks that will always bring negative consequences are referred to as a pure risks. Pure risks are also referred to as downside risk because the only consequence of such risks is adverse. It usually have adverse consequences. As I said before, example of pure risk is shipwreck Other examples include theft, motor accidents, fire hazards. All these are having negative or bringing about negative consequences. Pure risk can also be called internal control risk or operational risks. Another classification of risk is objective risks and subjective risks. Objective risks are risks that are measured or assessed based on facts and figures. A risk is objectively measured or assessed if determined based on available statistical data. When we have data that we can use to measure a particular risk, then we refer to such risks as objective risks. When, when available data or facts can give an estimate of level of likelihood and impact of an adverse event, then such risk can be said to have been objectively assessed. For example, risk of product A's failure identified from previous statistics or experience on the failure of a particular product A is an objectively measured risk. The subjective risks are those risks that are based on one's own judgments, discretion, opinion, or state of mind. Subjective risks do not involve mathematical calculations. They are not based on facts and figures. Examples of subjective risks include superstitious belief. People having superstitious belief that something may go wrong. For instance, if somebody decides to be avoiding flying because of the fact that in 2011 USA aircraft collapsed, had accident. Such a person that's having that subjectivity may decide not to be flying aircraft, and that's an example of a subjective risk. Another classification of risk is what referred to as strategic risks and operational risks. Strategic risks are those risks that are fundamental to the organization's existence and business plan. Strategic risks can affect the overall mission and vision of the organization. So, for strategic risks are those risks that affect the organization as a whole. It has long-term impact on the organization. Whenever it occurs, it affects the organization as a whole. That's exactly what we refer to as a strategic risk. While operational risk is that risk that affects only one unit or one segment of an organization. It might affect an operational area of the organization. This risk does not affect the fundamental existence of the organization. Another classification of risk is static risks and dynamic risks. Static risks are risks that do not change with time period. They are usually constant in nature at different time periods. What we're saying here is that constant risks are those risks that remain the same over a particular period of time. They are consistent in occurrence. It can really determine the time period that they will occur. But when you have a risk that is always changing, you cannot determine when it will come or happen. We refer to such a risk as dynamic. So dynamic risks are risks that change over time and in different situations. Another classification of risks is related risks and correlated risks. Related risks happen at the same time, while correlated risk is a risk in which its occurrence could either increase or trigger another risk, that's a positively correlated risk, or reduce the occurrence of another risk, that is negatively correlated risk. For positively correlated risks, both risks increase or decrease, while for negatively correlated risks, one increases while the other decreases at the same time. These are what referred to as correlated risks. Another classification of risks is what referred to as financial risks and non-financial risks. Financial risks and non-financial risks. Financial risks are those risks that are quantifiable or measurable in monetary or financial terms. When you have risks that you can measure monetarily, financially, and quantifiably, we refer to such risks as financial risks. Examples include liquidity risk, credit risks. While non-financial risks are not measurable in monetary terms, when you have any risk that cannot be measured in monetary terms, we refer to such risks as non-financial. Examples include environmental risk, reputation risk. For instance, reputational risk can bring serious problems to the organization, but you cannot measure quantitatively the value of such losses. In the long run, however, it will affect the cash flow of the organization. The profitability of the organization could be affected negatively as a decrease as a result of the negative consequences of bad reputation or reputation risks. For instance, when a company's goodwill has been negatively affected, it will lead to some losses of customers' patronages, and in the long run, this will equally impact on the kind of financial resources of the organization. Now, let's look at measurement of risk. How do we go about measuring risks? It is actually a very difficult task for an individual to accurately measure risk. It's not so easy for us to measure risk, but does that mean that we should not take time to measure the risk that may occur? Remember, these days, for us to survive and succeed in this ever-changing environment, in a dynamic business environment, there is the need for us to be what? Very, very proactive. We don't sit tight and allow events to come to us unprepared. We have to take some proactive measures. It is part of taking these proactive measures that we may try to measure risks. That's to say, we have to take time to determine the possibility of risk occurring. This is because risk is all about uncertainty of events, but it will become inappropriate for people concerned with risk to neglect risk measurement. Even if it cannot be ascertained accurately, some degree of or level of confidence is still very needed in risk measurement. As a business becomes aware that uncertain of economic situation, losses abound everywhere, there's need for us to take measures to measure the consequences of such economic events that may affect us negatively. As we say, there are opportunities and threats in the external environment. Threats are those unfavorable consequences that will lead to some losses to an organization. Organizations should be, as I said before, should be proactive. They should take time to understand those unfavorable consequences and devise strategies to avoid such events happening. It's on this note that we embark on risk management. Now, since we have said that it's necessary that we should measure the risk, the possibility of risk occurring, and the consequence of such risk, how do we go and measure such risk? How is risk measured? In risk management, risk measurement is done by placing numerical value on the likelihood of occurrence of the risk through our beliefs or fair judgments. Usually, the probability theory is used in the evaluation of risk. Probabilities are normally based on past experience or statistics, but in some situations where such statistical information are not available, then probability or likelihood of event can be calculated based on guess estimates. What we're trying to say here is the best way to measure risk is by using probability of events or likelihood of events using past figures, past data, or statistics. But when those data and statistics are not available, we can use guess information to make such calculation. Mathematically, risk can be measured as follows. Risk measurement or measurement of risk is equal to likelihood of occurrence multiplied by consequence. Risk is measured as likelihood of occurrence times consequences. That to say, the possibility that an event will occur and the consequence of that event occurring. This is how we measure risk. Now let's look at frequency and severity of risk. When we describe an event as risky, it implies two different things. It could either mean that such an event repeats itself often and often, or that the occurrence of the event would be unbearable. That is too great a loss. So when we're talking about frequency of risk, we're looking at the occurrence of that event from time to time. Then talking about the severity, we're looking at the impact, the consequence of the event. The event occurring will be bringing some enormous loss. That's talking about the severity of the event. So when we combine the occurrence of that event, the frequency of that event occurring, and also the severity of that event occurring, that's talking about what? The impact of a risky event. For example, when we say risk of fire, it could mean that fire damage would have a high probability of occurrence, or that if an event of fire damage should occur, the losses resulting from them could be so enormous. In a nutshell, frequency of risk refers to the probability or likelihood that a risk will occur, while severity of risk refers to the extent of damage, that level of jeopardy or degree of losses that or catastrophe that occur when such risk happens. We are going to stop here for today's lecture. Subsequently, we'll be meeting to discuss more on this. Have a lovely day. Like as I said, we can be reached through any of these numbers: 234 081 566 22679, 234 081 5662 2679, or 234 081 281 7717. I repeat, 080 281 7717. Our website is www.dannyking.consulting, www.dannykingconsulting.com, www.dannykingconsulting.com, while our email is dannykingconsulting@gmail, dannykingconsulting@gmail. Our WhatsApp number is 234 090 9493 5985, 090 9493 5985. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.